This morning we have been coming to the third part in our six-part series on what it means to learn from someone, to lean on someone, and to lead someone. We started out by suggesting that we all need people in our lives that kind of have those three roles. One, we need people in our lives that we're able to learn from. And so we've looked at a couple of passages over the last 2 weeks, one from Moses chapter 18, or Exodus chapter 18, about Moses and Jethro, and last week from Kings on the relationship between Elijah and Elisha, but how we need someone who we give the authority to speak with authority into our lives. We need someone that's willing to come alongside us and speak with authority. It doesn't matter whether we are a child, a teenager, in our early years, whether we are in retirement years, still someone that's able to come along and speak authoritatively and honestly into our circumstances. We all need someone like that. And so our encouragement over the last couple of weeks is to consider who have we allowed to have that role in our lives, because it really is an allowance to allow someone to speak authoritatively into our lives. Who do we have that we can do that? As we come to the second part of our series for this week and next week, we look at who do we have in our life that we're able to lean on? Who are we able to when times get tough, to be able to know that they'll put their arms around us and they'll hold us up? A number of years ago, I was working at a summer camp, and one of the folks that was there had been a friend of mine and became a closer friend of mine as we were there, and his name was John. Now, it so happened that my brother, who's one of my brothers at least, who's a little older than I am, before I started that summer at camp where I was the director and John was working with me, he had given me some advice, and he said, "Sean, you need to be able to let the people that are working with you and you're supervising, you have to put a lot of trust in them and show them that you're able to put trust in them." And so I was trying to think of ways I could do that. So one day John comes up to me, and I knew that he had the evening off because there was a concert going on in the city, and he and his brother were going to go to that concert. And so I had let them have the night off, and all of a sudden they come walking through the field, and I thought, this is odd, they should have left by now. And John comes up to me and says, "Sean, I got a big favor to ask." He said, "My truck broke down." And this concert was about an hour away in the city that John is from. He said, "I don't have a way to get there. And I really hate to ask this, but can I borrow your car?" Now, he was very concerned about asking. That was a pretty big ask, right? I was a young man myself, and so this vehicle was the only one I had. And so I said, "John, the keys are in my desk drawer. Just go grab them, and I'll see you later on when you get back. So let me know." And so, off he went. John told me years later, this was years later, that event to him was exceptionally encouraging for him that summer. That I would have enough confidence in him and trust in him that when he came, just very sheepishly asking this, that I would just put much trust in him and let him go. I didn't know that for years later, that event was so pivotal. But that ability to express confidence in someone, that he needed someone to lean on at that moment, and I was that person who was able to do that for him, and the encouragement that was, not only in his life that summer, but kind of in the way that he interacted with people later on. He invited me to his wedding, and it was actually at his wedding that he shared that story with me, how impactful that was. So we're looking at this ability to lean on others. And so we come to 1 Samuel chapter 20. 1 Samuel chapter 20, and here we see this relationship that I mentioned to the children, the friendship between Jonathan and David. And though it has a lot of dynamics to it, it shows a special relationship, two people that felt they could lean on one another even when times became difficult. So reading from 1 Samuel chapter 20, and we'll read. We're supposed to read the whole chapter together, but I think we'll get the first half of the account, and then we'll fill in the rest of the details afterwards as the loose ends are tied up. So then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is trying to take my life?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You're not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without confiding in me. Why would he hide this from me? It's not so." But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he has said to himself, "Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, there is only a step between me and death." Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you." David said, "Look, tomorrow is the new moon festival, and I'm supposed to dine with the king. But let me go and hide in the field until evening of the day after tomorrow. And if your father misses me at all, tell him, 'David earnestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because of an annual sacrifice that is being made there for his whole clan.' If he says, 'Very well,' then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he is determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I am guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father?" "Never," Jonathan said. "If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you?" David asked, "Who will tell me if your father answers harshly?" "Come," Jonathan said, "let us go out into the field." And so they went there together. Then Jonathan said to David, "By the Lord, the God of Israel, I will surely sound out my father by the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed towards you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father is inclined to harm you, may the Lord deal with me, and be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away safely. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness, like that of the Lord, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David affirm his oath of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. We have this conversation recorded for us between Jonathan and David. Now, to fill in a little bit of the backstory, the first king that has been appointed over Israel in Israel's history is a man named Saul. And he was a man who was tall, was broad-shouldered, stood above his clan, and God had anointed him to be king over Israel. But Saul, somewhere along his journey, he lost his way. A king's first duty in Israel was to maintain the covenant of God, to help the people know what their responsibilities were before God, and to carry them out, because God was unhatching a plan to bless the whole world. And he needed a king that was after his own heart. But we're shown through various incidents in 1 Samuel that Saul, though he is anointed to be king, and though he had wonderful tendencies, when push came to shove, when things got difficult, he would substitute his own will for God's will. He would substitute his own plan for God's plan. And so God had rejected him. And God had anointed in secret David as a young boy to be king after Saul. But of course, Saul kind of got an inkling of that, but he went on and had children, and Jonathan was one of these children. In fact, Jonathan, if things went according to plan, he should have become the king after King Saul. But Jonathan knew that the Lord's hand was with David, and saw David kind of coming up through the ranks of the military, taking roles over commander, becoming a general in Saul's army. He had an inkling that it was going to come to the point where David became king of Israel. And so here's David at a point where Saul is now breathing out threats and seeking to harm David. That begins to test this relationship between Jonathan and David. And if you've seen from this passage, the one overarching characteristic, I think, that defines their relationship is loyalty. That they have a loyalty to one another, a friendship, a bond, a loyalty to one another that's stronger than the circumstances they're going to. And as I think about this series, this theme, people that we can lean on, I think we need people, at least someone, and maybe someones, that have this characteristic of loyalty in and out, someone that we can truly lean upon. Now, loyalty I'd break down into maybe these following characteristics. To be loyal, we need someone who's willing to speak honestly into our lives. Now, not someone who's going to speak authoritatively, like this person we need that's going to teach us, but someone who's willing to really speak and have honest conversations with us when we need to hear them. And so here we see Jonathan and David. They were having this honest conversation. David was opening himself up to Jonathan, and Jonathan could have taken advantage of that information and harmed him. David is laying everything on the table. Your father is seeking to harm me. And Jonathan, at the same time, saying, no, he's not, but I will find out if what you're saying is valid, and I will let you know. And I'll speak honestly into this situation, even if it's to my own harm. You come to find out later on in this passage that they do have that dinner that David skips out on, and Saul does become enraged. So enraged that he seeks to pin his own son to the wall with a spear, because he's so upset that his son would be acting in ways that Saul thought was a betrayal to him. But Jonathan and David both speak with honesty. There was a prophet from a generation ago by the name of Billy Joel. He was a prophet through music. And one of the songs that he sang, and that I still remember and enjoy very much, is a little song called Honesty. And in it he says, if you search for tenderness, it isn't hard to find. You can have the love you need to live. But if you look for truthfulness, you might just as well be blind. It always seems so hard to give. Honesty is such a lonely word. Everyone is so untrue. Honesty is hardly ever heard, and mostly what I need from you. I can always find someone to say they sympathize if I wear my heart out on my sleeve. But I don't want some pretty face to tell me pretty lies. All I want is someone to believe. So in that little song, I think he speaks a truth. And again, he wasn't a Christian singer. He doesn't claim any relationship with God, far from it. But the idea that in his life he was looking for someone, it seems, that would speak truthfully to him. And that's what we need. If we want to have someone to really lean on, who is that person who will speak truthfully into our circumstances that we can rely upon? But not only do we need someone to speak truthfully, we need someone to act faithfully. Jonathan, it's easy to say the words, but it's a whole other thing to back them up. Jesus once told a parable about two sons. And he was telling this parable to the Pharisees. And he said there were two sons. And the father goes to one son and said, son, I want you to go out in the field and I want you to work for me. And the son says, no way. I'm not doing that. Yeah, he goes to the other son. He says, son, I want you to go work in the field for me. And the son says, right away, Dad. That son that says, right away, Dad, doesn't go off and do it. The other son, though, who said no, feels bad and eventually goes off and works in the field. And Jesus turns this story on its head and asks the Pharisees, who did the will of the Father? The one who said they were going to do it, or the one who comes through and actually does it? And of course the answer is the one who comes through and actually does it. We see in this story about Jonathan and David that Jonathan just doesn't say, you know what, I'll send out my father and then see how things are and let you know. He actually goes through and does it. He takes the chance of disappointing his father. He takes the chance of angering his father and then follows through and makes sure that he warns David toward the end of the passage that indeed our father's angry with you, and so you need to leave so that you can preserve your life. Jonathan follows through and acts faithfully. We need folks in our lives that aren't just going to speak nice words to us, but when push comes to shove, they know how to come through in those tough times. Do we have that person who speaks truthfully into our lives and is willing, like Jonathan, to act faithfully? Perhaps a third characteristic we could use is someone who is able to commit willingly. Someone who's able to commit willingly. If we're to have this person that we're able to lean upon, speak the truth, act faithfully, but we need to know that they're going to be there and they are willing to commit to us, to be in it for the long haul. We have people in our lives, I think you know, that sometimes you want to have that close relationship with, but you really need to do all the pulling. You need to do all the pushing. You're the one that needs to be there to try to make that happen. And sometimes we get a little response every once in a while, but not always the response that we need. And so it puts in a lot of effort, and sometimes they let us down. But we so desperately want that relationship that we're willing to go through that turmoil. Now, there are those people in our lives that are worth fighting for, absolutely. But we also need that person that's just there all the time. The person that we don't need to do the work to get them into our lives, but they're willing to commit to be there for us. We see David and Jonathan in this passage making this covenant with one another, that their relationship, even if their paths begin to diverge, which they're about to, that they would maintain faithfulness to one another, not only for their lifetime, but even beyond their lifetime. We come to find out in the writings of the next book of the Bible, in Kings, that indeed comes to pass. Jonathan died in battle with his father, Saul, but David, as he becomes king, he looks for someone from Jonathan's house to show faithfulness to. He goes and asks his courier, his courts people, is there anyone left from Jonathan's family that I can show faithfulness to? And he ends up finding a young man who had been crippled since birth, when all the bad things were happening, had ran away, and his nurse had dropped him, and he had become crippled in his feet. His name was Mephibosheth. And David takes Mephibosheth into his own home and takes him into his arm, under his own wing, because of his faithful commitment to Jonathan. David was in it. He didn't have to be forced into this relationship. He didn't have to be drug into it, but he was in it and was loyal to Jonathan. Someone who speaks truthfully, who acts faithfully, who commits willingly. We need someone in our life who will fulfill that role for us. Now, of course, as we ask that question, where's that person that's going to fulfill that role? We also have to ask the flip side of the question. Do you fulfill that role in the life of someone else? Is there someone there that you speak truthfully for, that you act faithfully for, that you're willing to commit willingly to, and cultivate that relationship so you're there for them, even as we pray that God would provide those individuals to be there for us? We need someone to lean upon. And if you don't have someone in your life right now that would fill that role, this is the time, Lord, I need someone. The best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. Second best time to plant a tree is today, if we want shade. Lord, who could you bring into my life that I could not only share in friendship with and be loyal towards, but they could also be that post to lean upon when times get challenging? Let's make that our prayer, even as we come to the communion table and we recognize that God has already provided us with an everlasting source of comfort and encouragement. And we come to the table to remember what Jesus did for us, his ultimate act of loyalty for us, and reminds us that we are to commit in loyalty to him.